Iraq got back to the World Cup because their football team was the one thing that did not fall apart. 40 years after 1986, they beat Bolivia 2-1 in Monterrey and finally made it back. But that goal was only the end. The real story is what Iraq had to survive before that finish could mean anything. Iraq had been to just one World Cup, and that was Mexico in 1986. Since then, whole generations had grown up without seeing Iraq on the biggest stage. Older fans could remember that team, and younger fans knew it through archive clips, old shirts, and stories told at home. That is what gave this campaign its weight. Hi, I'm Cyrus Fernando with FNTG, From Nothing to Glory, which finds the human side within the story. Iraq's return in 2026 was only their second World Cup appearance and their first in 40 years. That is why this was never a normal qualification story. Iraq was not a country that had stopped caring about football. The national team still mattered, and the shirt still mattered. Every new qualifying cycle carried the same idea. Maybe this would be that one time things turned old pride into something current again. But when the team means that much, failure stays with people. A near miss is not just a bad result, it becomes another year added to the weight. So this is not a story about Iraq suddenly showing up from nowhere. This is a story about a football program that stayed important for 40 years while the World Cup place stayed out of reach. That is why the scenes in Monterrey felt so strong. The feeling had lasted, the badge had lasted, the hope had lasted, and the team still had to prove it could carry all of that across the line. What made this campaign different was not that Iraq discovered emotion. The emotion was already there. What changed was that the team finally found a way to make that emotion lead somewhere real. For a lot of supporters, the World Cup has been a memory they inherited. In 2026, it became something they could finally live for themselves. Iraq's qualification was not only a return, it was a handoff from one generation of memory to another. At first, Iraq still had a cleaner road. They were in the race for direct qualification, and that matters because this is not supposed to become a rescue story. There was a shorter path back to the World Cup. Then that path started to close. Iraq drew 2-2 with Kuwait after trailing by 2 goals, and the result dropped them to third in Group B on goal difference. It felt less like escape and more like a warning that control was slipping. Then came the loss to Palestine. That made the margin thinner and the mood heavier. A few months later, South Korea beat Iraq 2-0 in Basra. That result sealed Korea's place at the World Cup and confirmed Jordan as the other direct qualifier from the group, which pushed Iraq into the playoff route instead. From that point, this stopped being a clean qualification push and became a survival run. That is a point where a lot of teams begin to come apart. One bad result starts to affect the next one. The mood gets heavier, the football gets rushed, and every difficult moment begins to feel proof that the campaign is ending. Iraq got very close to that point, but it did not go over it. The coaching change is part of that story. In 2025, Graham Arnold came in, with Iraq sitting third in Group B, and only 2 matches left in that round. He replaced Jesus Casas with the team still alive, but with the cleanest path already shaking. Arnold didn't have time to rebuild Iraq from the ground up. He did not have time for a long project. What he had time to do was settle the mood, simplify the next step, and stop one bad result from infecting the next game. That sounds small, but in a long qualifying campaign, it matters. Once the direct route is gone, the problem is no longer only football quality. The problem is whether the group can still think clearly while the pressure grows, and Iraq still had enough quality to get there. The question was whether the team could stay steady long enough to use it. But Iraq's spark was not style, it was composure. Iraq stopped playing like every setback was the start of another collapse. Arnold's job was not to turn the team into something completely new, it was to make the next match feel playable again. And that shift showed up in the fourth round. Iraq beat Indonesia 1-0 through Zidane Iqbal, then drew with Saudi Arabia 0-0. The draw was not enough to take the direct place from that group, so Saudi went through, and Iraq had to keep going into the next stage. But the important part was this: Iraq didn't fall apart when the shorter route disappeared again. They stayed in the fight, and that is what changed. Not the beauty, not freedom, and not some sudden perfect run. The team just became harder to shake. It started handling delay better. It started accepting that this is a road was not going to become simple. But once that happened, the whole story changed and began to feel different. Iraq were no longer chasing the perfect route. They were proving they could survive the imperfect one. By now, Iraq had lost the direct road and then missed the shorter playoff route. Most teams would have started feeling defeated, but Iraq still looked like a team that believed the story was there to take. The first leg against UAE ended 1-1. Ali Al-Hamidi gave Iraq the lead. Luanzinho equalised for the UAE, and the tie stayed open. That was the pattern of this campaign by then. Iraq would get close to control, and then the game would ask for one more answer. Then came Basra. This was the kind of match that tells you what a team really has left. UAE scored first through Keo Lucas, and suddenly the danger was no longer just in people's heads. It was on the scoreboard. Iraq were behind. The tie was turning. Mohanan Ali equalised and kept the campaign alive, but even after that, there was no calm. The clock kept moving. The pressure stayed on the match. And Basra did not sound like a crowd waiting for a celebration. It sounded like a crowd trying to drag a team over the line. Then, deep into stoppage time, Iraq got a penalty. Amir Al-Amari stepped up and scored. Iraq won 2-1 on the night and 3-2 on aggregate. It was one of the biggest moments of the whole run. Not only because it won the tie, but because it showed the team could still think clearly when the whole campaign was hanging on one touch. And even then, it still was not over. Iraq had played 21 qualifiers on the road to 2026, which is more than any other team in this cycle. One of the longest qualification campaigns ever recorded. That detail matters because it explains that feeling around the last match. This was not a team arriving fresh. This was a team that had already been tested again and again, and still had one more game to win. Ali Al-Hamadi gave Iraq the lead in the 18th minute. Bolivia equalised through Moises Paniagua before half-time. The match did what this campaign had done for months. Then Ayman Hussein scored in the 53rd minute. And that is the image people will remember. But the goal itself is only part of why the moment lands. Before the final whistle, you could already see the releases starting on the bench. Players were on their feet, staff were leaning forward, faces in the crowd looked less like joy than disbelief. Like people were trying not to trust the moment too soon. This is what 40 years does. It teaches people to wait for the whistle. Then, in a very long time, Iraq did not have to carry the story any further. The 2-1 win sent them back to the World Cup and placed them in Group I with France, Senegal, and Norway. The route had been long, uneven, and full of moments when it felt as if the whole thing could slip away. And that is exactly why the finish felt so strong. Iraq had finally reached the point where survival and success became the same thing. Most people will show you the winning goal and call that the story, but it's not. The goal finished the job. The real story is that Iraq kept control of itself to still be there when that chance came. The whistle went and the release was immediate. Players dropped to the pitch. The bench poured out. Fans screamed, cried, and held onto each other. Iraq had not just won one more playoff. They had ended a 40-year wait and closed a qualifying run that had stretched through 21 matches. It ended a 40-year wait since 1986. 9 full qualification cycles without a World Cup. The words after the match fit the footage. Mircea Stotsky said it was for 46 million Iraqis. Graham Arnold said Iraq passion and pride won it. That sounds big, but the images support it. This did not feel like a one dressing room celebrating a good result. It felt like a football nation finally getting an answer it had waited too long to hear. For years, Iraq's World Cup story lived in archive footage and family memory. In Monterrey, it became present again. That is not enough to explain the tears. What makes Iraq's return powerful? It's not only that they qualified, it is that the team kept carrying meaning. Even after the easy roads disappeared, the route kept changing, the weight kept growing, the shirt kept mattering anyway. Iraq lost the direct route, missed the shorter 4th round route, changed coaches under pressure, survived the UAE, and then finished the job in Mexico. The path kept getting harder, the team kept going. That is why this return feels bigger than a normal qualification story. It is not only about making a tournament, it is about staying intact long enough to make that return possible. Iraq did not cruise back to the World Cup. It had to drag itself there in pieces, then hold those pieces together until the final chance arrived. Next week, we're covering more qualification stories that meant more than just a ticket. So subscribe and share this with someone who understands why some national teams feel bigger than football. Iraq's story shows what nations sacrifice to reach the World Cup. But once you get there, a different question begins. Who profits most from football's biggest stage? Well, that's where FTGP goes next. See the link above. And if this story is yours too, where does Iraq's 2026 return rank amongst the most emotional World Cup qualification stories you've seen? Comment down below. I'm Cyrus Fernando, and I'll see you soon.